everyone, and welcome to this week's webinar. We are covering the Champion series. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining today. Shortly, I'll be introducing Doug Myhill, who will be talking to us about testing champions, but just a couple of little plugs from me before we get going. So we're halfway through the Champion series now. We've posted 3 of our webinars already on the platform, so feel free to go and listen back to those. Last time we were talking to Lisa Rockleshaw, who's a serial sales manager who's been working with MEDDIC for some time. We specifically covered some subjects around identifying the champion and also what happens if you've got a partner in the way. So definitely worth going back and having a listen to that one on the platform. If you have any challenges with finding anything on the platform, then do let us know. We've got some of the team on today, so you can post some of those questions in the chat, or we can come back to you afterwards, no problem. The next 2 that we're going to be covering in the series after today is we're going to be doing Champions Economic Buyer in the next webinar, which will be in 2 weeks. And then the last one that we'll be doing, which will be on the 4th of July. So apologies for US holidays, but it will be available on record, which will be Champions in Closing, which leads us very nicely into what will be the autumn series, which is using champions with decision process, which will be kicking off in September after we've had the summer break. One final thing for me before we get going with Doug today is that we have just launched our Women in Sales webinar series for this year. The first webinar is on the 1st of July. If you need details of that, we can provide some information, so just let us know in the chat today. But if you also check out the newsletter that comes out every 2 weeks, the link for that is available on the newsletter as well. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome and say thanks for Doug for joining us today. So welcome, Doug. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Emma. Thanks very much for the invite. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Great to kick off with a little bit of background about yourself, Doug. Where have you been? What have you been doing? Just to give us a little bit of your credentials about why you might know a thing or two about a champion.
Yeah, so I've been working in enterprise sales for the last 10 to 15 years, using MEDDIC very much as the foundation for having really good control around a deal. And obviously you can do a deal without MEDDIC, but actually it's so much less stress when you've got the right components, the pain, the champions, and the economic buyer all within the process. And previous to that, I worked in marketing, and I like to try and bring some of the communication skill that I had from marketing and some of that creativity into being a little bit different within the sales environment as well.
That's great. And I know you probably don't want to toot your own horn about this, but as we've worked together a number of times over the years, Doug's done some absolutely amazing deals, and I'm sure a lot of that experience that he'll be talking about in those deals over the years will be brought into some of the questions that we answer today. So again, feel free to ask some questions today as we go through, either on testing a champion or any of the questions around champions. So and actually, to the point I mentioned earlier about Lisa talking, Doug, around with partners as well. You'd previously worked for Morse, so and I know we'd worked together when you were in a channel environment as well. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that a bit later on.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So so one of the first question that I've got for you today then is specifically about testing champions. We have spent some time on identifying champions, but feel free to talk about that too. But why is it so important to test a champion, do you think? Specifically, if you think you've got a champion and you're feeling good in your gut, why bother? Why bother testing one?
Because you want to make sure before the 31st of December that they are a champion and not a coach, because everyone gets upset if you miss the important deadlines and the commitments that you've made. So start small, test small, I would say, right from the beginning, and then build up to some of the bigger elements you might want to test as well.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because we also talk to the point about, you've got to earn the right to be able to test a champion. It's, a relationship at the end of the day, and you've got to have several touch points to be able to do that. So, how do you go about that then in sort of testing in the early stages? Because, there's some key points in the sales cycle you look to test. What does that look like to you, and how early do you test?
Yeah, so good question. I test right from the very first meeting. So and let's be clear, I'm also being tested. So am I a salesperson or am I a trusted advisor? Because actually, what a champion is looking for is a trusted advisor who's going to add value and add pennies in the jar. So right from that very first engagement, I'm trying to build trust, respect, and integrity with the champion, and I will start very early on by thanking them for inviting me to the meeting. So at that point, they're buying, I'm not selling. And so again, it's just a small psychological step right at the start of the meeting. And I'll ask if they can help quantify the pain. And if they say finance has got this pain, IT has got this pain, or ops have got this pain, then sometimes that's the start of a red light or a red flag. If they say Emma in finance or Sam in operations, if they start using people's names, then that shows there's an element of trust there. So right from that very early on, I start with those things, and I continue with that on every single engagement. There's a small test at some level.
Yeah. And then, so it's really interesting about what you're saying about champions being able to sort of, they're being prepared to give up people's names. We talk about this quite a lot in the training that we do around usually people with power are not afraid of giving power up because it's not a finite amount of power. They have power, they know they have power. It sort of doesn't matter to them if they give it away. But people who have less power usually are the ones that are frightened of that because they feel like it is a finite object and they don't want to give it away. So it sounds like things like, names, being able to share information, those types of things is important. But sort of how does that work in those early stages? Do you find that that's with all levels within an organization, or do you tend to find that are you tending to target a champion quite early, quite senior?
Yeah, I usually try and start early or senior, or get to that person, because it just makes the engagement much easier and allows you to qualify it harder and quicker. Because if you've got a champion who's got pain and your solution can help address that pain, then you can progress with that quite quickly. And if not, then time will lag and you'll be wasting your time rather than focusing on the right things. So to your question about what I would do is initially I would ask for something small, something they've got. I'd perhaps say, can you send me a policy? Can you sell me a procedure? What does as is look like today, and what's the pain? If they're prepared to send me something anonymized, so not confidential documentation, but send me that, then that's a good green light for me. If they say they want an NDA, then that's a concern for me, because actually I'm never going to ask for information that should require an NDA. So I start small with lots of questions and start with, if you can give me that, then I'll do this with it. And when I commit to I'll do this with it, I do it. And by the time I'm going to do it, that I've said I'll deliver by.
Yeah, no, it's a really great point as well around, yep. So it's always a give to get, and you're always delivering on the things that you said that you would deliver on. So that's early on in the sales cycle. What are some of the tests that you use sort of as you go later, sort of through the sales cycle, then to continue testing to make sure you're not left with the wrong person on Christmas, on New Year's Eve?
Yeah. So one of the next things I'll do is ask for something they haven't got. So actually, can you take me somewhere else within the organization, not straight to the EB, but take me somewhere else, or deliver me something that I can can use to provide more value back. So have you got some quantifiable evidence that perhaps I can do a review on around productivity loss, potential revenue improvements, or risk? Is there something that I can look at within your data that's been anonymized again, where I can say, I think you've got this level of risk, so I can then start quantifying things. So something they haven't got that they have to go and get from somewhere else, and or introduce me to someone else in the business.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So again, introductions, not being careful with, how they do that. I mean, obviously they need to have a think about um, the right people, but again, that shows that they've got power and influence and they know that they're the right people to go to. So yeah, they're really great tests. Okay. Um, so and then what about towards the end of the sales cycle? So then when you're, really in that closing motion, what are some of the things that you tried to do, and what's the good behavior that you see at the end that really shows you, well, actually, I've got somebody that's willingness to close as much as I am.
Yeah, what I absolutely love actually is when someone else within the business uh, talks back something that we've shared with them. So it hasn't come from my champion, but my champion has been selling when I'm not there. And I've given them some nuggets through the sales cycle. So just some quick, simple things that are easily repeatable, that are very memorable, associated with their pain. And if someone else says that to me, I know I'm in a good place, that actually the communications are going well. When we talk about the business case, it's not yours, it's ours. We talk in ours, and we're jointly in this together to try and achieve the outcome that's required for them. And mutually presenting a business case to the appropriate stakeholders. So it's our business case, so why don't we present it together? And it doesn't happen everywhere, but again, when you know you're presenting that business case together, that's a really strong signal that you've got the right person and they're committed. The organization is committed to running the program.
Yeah, absolutely. So they can see that it's the win-win. You've worked on it together. They're as committed as you, and frankly, also that they agree with the numbers that are in there as well. They're not just something that you've just created and sent over to them. They're invested. They're bought in to those numbers. Okay. We've got some questions that are coming in on the chat, so we'll have a look at those in a moment. So keep those questions coming in. We'll have plenty of time to go through those. I do want to talk about a point that we talked about previously in the prep, and thinking about interesting insights that the team would be interested in hearing today. One of the things that we had discussed was about what happens if a champion fails a test, because I know some organisations that we've all worked in the past, that's usually a huge red flag against a champion. I think, we're interested in people's behaviour, but what do you think, Doug, when somebody fails a champion test?
To a certain extent, I feel I've perhaps failed in my communication as well because I didn't articulate how important it was. So perhaps I wasn't clear in my ask and the timelines that I needed that ask for. Um, Even today, I was with a champion who's just done a deal with me. I was having a conversation with him, and he said, "If that's important, I'll move my diary to go there for you." So that's a champion that will be able to work with me in a number of. If I move organisations, that person's a kind of champion for life. We've delivered a solid program together. So if that particular individual and anyone I would consider to be a champion didn't pass the test, I'd call them out on it. As long as I'd been clear in my messaging, I'd say, "What can you just help me understand why that didn't happen, and let me share with you the implication of that for me."
Yeah,
We
absolutely.
have that relationship.
Yeah, that's really great advice. And I think it's really key to be able to do this, because often I think in sales we're trying to guess what's going on in the customers, in the customer environment, what the customer's trying to do. We need to just take the mystery out of it a little bit and actually ask people the question. When you shared that story with me before, I recalled an opportunity I'd been working on a few years ago, where I was dealing with somebody very senior in a big financial services organization that I'd worked with several times before, and he had said to me, "You will get this order on the 3rd of September." That was a date that he had come up with. So in my head, I'd thought, absolutely, it's going to be the 3rd of September. And that day came and it went. And then I was on the phone to him and I said, "Hey, what's going on here? Because you said the 3rd of September." And it was really interesting because he said, "Did I? Is that what I said?" And I said, "Yeah, you did." And now we're in a situation like, "Oh, was that important?" Yes, it was. Absolutely, it was important. He's like, "Right, well, let's make a new plan. Let's make sure that it's a date that's important to you and it's important to us, because we need to move at speed." And absolutely, he hadn't realized that just how important that was to us to have it on that date, because those commitments had then been made. So really important to go and do that. So that's, yeah.
Interesting on that, not to then interview you back, but what would you have done differently in that situation with that individual again in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I would have said, now that you've said that it's this day and these things are going to happen, I would have been very clear with, I'm going to communicate that back to the people I need to communicate that to, just so you know, I'm on the hook for us as much as you are. So I think I absolutely would have been clear. But the thing is, again, is that, we as salespeople, and we talk about this a lot, that we're humans. And when somebody says to us, we're going to get it done, there's almost a little bit of, we daren't ask any more questions. We worry about, if we ask the next level of question, perhaps something's just going to disappear, rather than feeling like we can qualify, or we swing the other way and qualify too much and interrogate the customer. So there's definitely a balance between, you've said that you're going to do this, let me just check what exactly you've said that you're going to do, which be useful to do certainly in future. That's one that will stay with me for sure. Fortunately, we closed it before quarter end, so actually the rest is sort of in history. But some questions that have come in from the chat anyway. So we've had a question that's come in around, can you have various champions within a corporation? What is the maximum number of champions that you might have? What are your thoughts on that question, Doug?
I kind of feel like there's probably a lead champion. If you've got a committee, then there's the opportunity for ambiguity and for things to slip through the cracks. And part of our role in sales is also to keep everybody informed. So very often I'll know what a piece of the organization is doing over here because I'm talking to multiple streams within the business. And so me communicating that thing's happening over there to that person is very important, but I'd still feel more like there's probably one solid champion rather than multiple.
Yeah, absolutely. We would completely agree with that. So certainly the deals that we've reviewed over the years and the businesses certainly that myself and some of the other coaches have worked in, even when there is a consensus-based decision that's been made, like for example, often we see that in the Nordics, there's a lot of consensus that goes on around decisions. There is still one person that is making a decision to put it on the agenda to bring it forward. And often when there's multiple departments that are involved in a purchase as well, there's usually a lead person that is the lead economic buyer, if you like. So we try to be a bit purist about who's the person putting it on the agenda. Now, if you are doing a large deal in a big account, you might be trying to do multiple deals with multiple departments, and over time, trying to take a lot of different revenue out of an account. So you should certainly have champions for every one of those opportunities for sure. But there's got to be somebody that's then bringing that together if you're going to transact one opportunity. So I don't know if you've got any other thoughts on that, Doug, or we can move
I
on
would
to.
say there's lots of coaches, and actually, a coach today in one department, if you are cross-selling, could be your next champion. But for a deal, I think you need one champion because there's one EB. There might be a committee of EBs, but actually, one person will take it to the EB.
Yeah. Yeah,
Economic buyer, sorry. Yep.
no, absolutely. And on the coaches point, coaches are so important. I think often as well we can be quite dismissive of coaches because they're not the person that we're looking for in the champion. But the reality is in a lot of cases, those coaches could be people that are underneath the champion and they're just earlier in their careers. They haven't got to the point yet where they have the power and influence. They haven't established their career to be able to be that champion, but careers are long. So, whilst, I mean, certainly one of the things that we often talk about is certainly my champions over the years have now become economic buyers because they've moved up in the pecking order in large organizations. Same goes for coaches. So, we want to make sure that we're building lots of conversations with coaches, making sure that we're still building advocates, but then as they go up, hopefully they would then become champions. Okay. Another question that we've had come in, which is coming from Mark, which is, what is your preferred course of action when a champion insists that everything needs to go through them?
Well, you can't. If that would, I'd see that as a bit of a blocker. Actually, it would be a slight red flag for me as to why that is. And when I've trying to think of a champion that's done that, I've had lots of coaches that have done that, but I think a true champion will take you somewhere else. Now, they might not. I mean, the ultimate test is that you jointly share the business case. And Emma, you and I have done some of those over the years where we've gone in with a conservative business case and it's been talked up by the EB to say, actually, we think we can get more there. So we're even more compelling. It would be a red flag to me. And if I had a good relationship, I'd ask them why. And was it because they didn't trust me? I hadn't earned the ability to go somewhere else? Or was it that you talked about the power earlier on, that they're worried about giving up the power, and someone with confidence and good ability within the organization won't be concerned by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So our experience on this is there's usually sort of three common themes we see around champions not allowing you to go. I mean, particularly when it's everything's going through them. Usually that's referring to not going to the economic buyer or getting to other stakeholders. There's three themes that we see. The first one is trust that you mentioned. Maybe you booked a church on a first date, you asked too early, you haven't had multiple dates with them, you've not built that credibility. So trust would be the first thing. The second point, which is the more obvious point, which is perhaps that person isn't a champion. They don't have power and influence, track record for change, something to gain, and access to the economic buyer. So actually, they cannot take you forward. So their credentials are a challenge. But the third one that we often see as well is that you haven't sold the reason why, whether that's to go and meet with an economic buyer, which is maybe, or to go and talk to finance around building a business case. You haven't talked about why it's important for you to go and do that, or you together should go and do that, and what's in it for the economic buyer, what's in it for the champion. Often we see salespeople say, let's go and take this to your CIO, rather than, in our experience, for these types of projects to be successful, for you to get the outcome, us going together and talking about how other organizations have done this and we can bring that information. You're selling the meeting essentially to be able to go and do that. So trust, credentials of your champion, and then also thinking about selling the meeting are key things to have a think about.
Yeah, what I might also ask there is where they've done it before as well. So how that approach has worked for them before. Maybe not quite as blunt as that, but perhaps just say, can you tell me how you've run these programs before, and what does a successful project look like when you're looking to make a transformational change? And then you can see if it's an organizational thing or actually if it is a person thing, whether they're talking with confidence about what they've done in the past and successfully implemented change.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, a good question that we often give on our training actually is so when somebody says that and they say, actually, it all goes through me, I'm the only person you need to see, I'm the budget holder, I'm the decision maker, I'm the et cetera, et cetera. A question that I often use is, that's great, amazing. Is there a governance process that you have to go through? Does anybody have to, for compliance reasons, just agree to your decision? Now, any organisation or person worth their salt knows that they cannot just go and make a decision, for hundreds of thousands of pounds without getting somebody to check they're not buying it off a family member. So if you ask a governance question, usually then they have to open up to, yeah, there is another department or somebody. If they don't do that, then you're definitely dealing with somebody who doesn't know how to buy anything, because that's just not what happens in organizations. Okay. So final question that we'll take, because we're fast running out of time as always. So Oscar has asked a question, which is, how do you use your champion to prepare for the economic buyer meeting? What does that look like in your world? And you're doing some big deals, Doug. So I imagine there's a bit of prep that's going on there.
Yeah, there is. I think again, I've talked a lot about integrity and trust. So I need to build that trust and that confidence. I need to make sure that actually I know more about the industry and what they're buying than they do, which helps me get to that meeting because actually they don't have to learn everything. They've brought someone with them who knows what's going on. Very often, what we find through the kind of audit process that we'll run when we're identifying pain is that we also end up knowing more about the organization. So we sometimes know more than the champion, and not to catch them out, but to make sure that actually perhaps we're the detail person in that meeting and they're the summary person. So we would work on it together. It would be a mutual case for change. We would agree what was in the presentation, but perhaps also what wasn't in the presentation, because there might be some things that actually for a larger audience, if there's a bigger team you're pitching to, you might not want to say you're taking 40 FTEs out with this because actually that might not sit well with everybody. But I would definitely do the planning together, and I would ask for commentary from the EB as to who's in the room and what their objectives are. What does that person want, and are they briefed in advance? So when you turn up, actually you're well prepared. You've got some nodding heads in the room, and those people know what your business case is and what you're asking for.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I think it's something worth just reiterating as well, just on that's what happens in great steering committee meetings. What you tend to find is when a customer takes a project forward internally, when it comes back as a no and you get objections, usually you find it's because they haven't done that. They haven't done their briefings. They haven't got the nodding heads in the room. So, our customers and our very experienced champions are doing that. They understand that that's what you do. You prepare, you make sure you've got some friendlies in the room, you're anticipating the objections, you make it a nice meeting because these people are senior. You want to have a little bit of questioning, but you want to make sure it's also a success because it's their careers that are at stake as well. So, if somebody doesn't want to prepare for a meeting with an economic buyer, then that probably tells you that person isn't a champion because they don't know that that's how the world works, or certainly in large organizations anyway. That's great. Any final tips before we finish up today, Doug? Do you have the one tip that you might have on testing a champion out of all the things that we've talked about today?
They're testing you too. So just be on your guard the whole time that actually, yes, we are doing some champion testing, but they're testing us. Are we a trustworthy person? Do we know what we're talking about externally and within their organization? Are we subject matter experts? And are they comfortable to put us in front of somebody else? So just keep in mind that, yes, we're doing lots of testing, but that is happening on the other end as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. Their outcomes are based on our credibility to deliver, and that's really important. So that's great. Well, so thank you so much. We're out of time for today, but it's been an absolute pleasure having you on today, Doug, and so much wisdom there for everybody. If anybody has got any additional questions, then please do follow up and let us know, and we can get some answers to you. Thanks very much for joining today, Doug, and thanks to everybody else. We'll stop recording and then we'll see you in a couple of weeks for the next one. Thanks.
Thanks, Emma. Thanks, everybody.